Welcome to the Folktale Project. This is Dan Scholz. This week we're picking back up with Samuel Crockett's retelling of Waverley, with Chapter 3, The Baron and the Bear. Rose Bradwardine was still quite young. Scarce did the tale of her years number 17, but already she was noted all over the countryside as a pretty girl, with a skin like snow and hair that glistened like pale gold when the light fell upon it. Living so far from society, she was naturally not a little shy. But as soon as her first feeling of bashfulness was over, Rose spoke freely and brightly. Edward and she, however, had but little time to be alone together, for it was not long before the Baron of Bradwardine appeared, striding toward them as if he had possessed himself of the giant's 7-league boots. Bradwardine was a tall, thin, soldierly man, who, in his time, had seen much of the world, and who under a hard and even stern exterior hid a naturally warm heart. He was much given to the singing of French songs and to making long and learned Latin quotations, and indeed he quoted Latin, even with the tears standing in his eyes as he first shook Edward by the hand and then embraced him in the foreign fashion on both cheeks, all to express the immense pleasure it was to receive in his house of Tully Veolan a worthy scion of the old stock of Waverley honour. While Miss Rose ran off to make some changes in her dress, the Baron conducted Edward into a hall hung about with pikes and armour. 4 or 5 servants in old-fashioned livery received them with honour, the major duomo at their head. The butler gardener was not to be caught napping a second time. Bradwardine took Captain Waverley at once into an old dining-room all panelled with black oak, round the walls of which hung pictures of former chiefs of the line of Tully Veolan. Somewhere out of doors a bell was ringing to announce the arrival of other guests, and Edward observed with some interest that the table was laid for 6 people. In such a desolate country it seemed difficult to imagine where they would arrive from. Upon this point Edward soon received enlightenment. First, there was the Laird of Balmawhapple, a discreet young gentleman, said the Baron, much given to field sports. Next came the Laird of Killinkiret, who cultivated his own fields and cared for his own cattle, thereby, quoth the Baron, showing the commonness of his origin. Added to these were a non-juring episcopal minister, that is, one who had refused to take the oath of allegiance to King George's government, and last of all, the Baron Bailey, or land steward of Bradwardine, one Mr. Wackweeble. This last, to show his consciousness of his inferior position, seated himself as far as possible from the table, and as often as he wanted to eat he bent himself nearly double over his plate, in the shape of a clasped knife about to shut. When dinner was over, Rose and the clergyman discreetly retired, when, with a sign to the butler, the Baron of Bradwardine produced out of a locked case a golden cup, called the Blessed Bear of Bradwardine, in which first the host, and then all the company pledged the health of the young English stranger. After a while, the Baron and Edward set out to see their guests a certain distance on their way, going with them down the avenue to the village change-house or inn, where Balmawhapple and Killinkiret had stabled their horses. Edward, being weary, would much rather have found himself in bed, but this desertion of good company the Baron would no ways allow. So, under the low cobwebbed roof of Lucky McClary's kitchen, the 4 gentlemen sat down to taste the sweets of the night. But it was not long before the wine began to do its work in their heads. Each one of them, Edward excepted, talked or sang without paying any attention to his fellows. From wine they fell to politics, when Balmawhapple proposed a toast which was meant to put an affront to the uniform Edward wore and the king in whose army he served. "To the little gentleman in black velvet," cried the young laird, "he who did such service in 1702, and may the white horse break his neck over a mound of his making." The little gentleman in black velvet was the mole over whose hillock King William's horse is said to have stumbled while the white horse represented the house of Hanover. Though of a Jacobite family, Edward could not help taking offence at the obvious insult, but the Baron was before him. The quarrel was not his, he assured him. The guest's quarrel was the host's, so long as he remained under his roof. "Here," quoth the Baron, I am in loco parentis to you, Captain Waverley. I am bound to see you scatheless. And as for you, Mr. Falconer of Bamowapple, I warn you to let me see no more aberrations from the paths of good manners. And I tell you, Mr. Cosmo, common Bradwardine of Bradwardine and Tullyvalen, retorted the other in huge disdain, that I will make a mere cock of the man that refuses my toast, whether he be a crop-eared English Whig with a black ribbon around his lug, or any who deserts his friends to claw favour with rats of Hanover. In an instant, rapiers were out, and the Baron and Bamowapple hard at it. The younger man was stout and active, but he was no match for the Baron at the sword-play, and the encounter would not have lasted long had not the landlady, Lucky McCleary, hearing the well-known clash of swords, come running in on them, crying that surely the gentleman would not bring dishonour on an honest widow woman's house when there was all the Leland in the country to do their fighting upon. So saying, she stopped the combat very effectually by flinging her plaid over the weapons of the adversaries. Next morning, Edward awoke late, and in no happy frame of mind. It was an age of duels, and with his first waking thoughts there came the memory of the insult which had been passed upon him by the Laird of Bamowapple. His position, as an officer, and a Waverley, left him no alternative but to send that sportsman a challenge. Upon descending, he found Rose Bradwardine presiding at the breakfast table. She was alone, but Edward felt in no mood for conversation and sat gloomy, silent, and ill-content with himself and with circumstances. Suddenly, he saw the Baron and Bamowapple pass the window arm in arm, and the next moment the butler summoned him to speak with his master in another apartment. There he found Bamowapple, no little sulky and altogether silent, with the Baron by his side. The latter, in his capacity as mediator, made Edward a full and complete apology for the events of the past evening, an apology which the young man gladly accepted along with the hand of the offender, somewhat stiffly given, it is true, owing to the necessity of carrying his right arm in a sling, the result, as Bamowapple afterwards assured Miss Rose, of a fall from his horse. It was not till the morning of the second day that Edward learned the whole history of this reconciliation, which had at first been so welcome to him. It was daft Davy Gellatley, who, by the way of roguish singing of a ballad, first roused his suspicions that something underlay Bamowapple's professions of regret for his conduct. "The young man will brawl at the evening board, heard ye so merry the little bird sing, but the old man will draw at the dawning his sword, and the Thistlecock's head is under his wing." Edward could see by the sly looks of the fool that he meant something personal by this, so he plied the butler with questions, and discovered that the Baron had actually fought Bamowapple on the morning after the insult and wounded him in the sword arm. Here, then, was the secret of the young laird's unexpected submission and apology. As Davy Gellatley put it, Bamowapple had been sent home with his boots full of blood. And here we have the first interlude of action. The tale-telling had at this point to be broken off. Clouds began to spin themselves on Eldian top. Dinner was also in a prospect, and most of all, having heard so much of the tale, the four listeners decided to begin to play Waverley. Sweetheart made a stately of skirted Bradwardine. Besides, she was in Caesar, and had store of Latin quotations, mostly, it is true, from the examples in the grammar, such as Illa indicit regina. Certainly, she walked like a queen. Or, as it might be expressed more fittingly with the character of the Baron in the original, stately stepped she east the way, and stately stepped she west. Hugh John considered the hero's part in any story only his due. His only fault with that of Waverley was that he had so far done so little. He specially resented the terrible combat in the dawning between the Baron and the overbold Bamowapple, played by Maid Margaret. Sir Toady Lyon, as low comedian, chameleon he called it, performed numerous antics as daft Davy Gellatley. He had dressed the part to perfection by putting his striped jersey on outside his coat and sticking in his cricket cap such feathers as he could find. "Lie down, Hugh John," he cried in the middle of his dancing and singing round and round the combatants. "Why, you are asleep in bed." This, according to the authorities, being obvious, the baffled hero had to succumb, with the muttered reflection that Jim Hawkins wouldn't have had to stay asleep when he heard a fight like that going on. Still, however, Hugh John could not restrain the natural rights of criticism. He continually raised his head from his pillow of dried branches to watch sweetheart and maid Margaret. "You fight just like girls," he cried indignantly. "Keep your left hand behind you, Bradwardine, or Bamawapple will hack it off. I say, girls are silly things. You two are afraid of hurting each other, now me and Toady Lion." And he gave details of a late fraternal combat much in the manner of Poisson. It is to be noted that thus far both sweetheart and maid Margaret disdained the female parts, the latter even going the length of saying that she preferred Celie Stubbs, the squire's daughter at Waverley Honour, to Rose Bradwardine. On being asked for an explanation of this heresy, she said, "Well, at any rate, Celie Stubbs got a new hat to come to church in." And that is Chapter 3, The Baron and the Bear, and our first interlude of action. I hope you're enjoying this tale. It really is a very interesting story and a very interesting book, these retellings. This is Dan Scholz of the Folktale Project. Don't forget that you can subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Google Play, Overcast, anywhere you'd like to get your podcasts. You can follow us on Twitter at Folktale Project. You can find us on Auto Radio, TuneIn Radio, iHeartRadio, Spotify, anywhere you'd like to listen. And you can always head over to folktaleproject.com, where you'll find a new story waiting for you every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. As always, thank you so much for listening.